Hey creatives, in today's video we're going to learn how to make the title sequence from Marvel's new Doctor Strange movie, Multiverse of Madness, all in Adobe After Effects. As always, you can download this project file from our Discord, link in the description down below. Let's get into it. Let's create a new composition and we're going to make it 1920 by 1080 at 24 frames, and we'll set the duration to 10 seconds. Rename it to whatever makes sense to you. I just named mine Doctor Strange Intro and press OK. Let's start off with the background. Create a new solid layer by right clicking, new and solid, or by using the shortcut Control or Command Y. We'll leave it the same settings as our main comp and just rename it to Fractal Noise. Head over to the Effects and Presets panel and yep, you guessed it, search for Fractal Noise and drag and drop it onto our solid layer. Let's change the fractal type to dynamic and noise type to spline. We'll also invert it and change the contrast to 365 and the brightness to -30. Expand the transform options and uncheck uniform scaling and increase the height to 150. Make sure your playhead is at the beginning of the timeline, and under the transform properties, we'll add a keyframe for offset turbulence by clicking the stopwatch icon. Move your playhead to the end of the timeline by using the shortcut End, and let's change the offset turbulence to 3200 and it should automatically create a new keyframe. The last thing we'll do with this layer is add an expression to the evolution property. Hold Alt or Option and click the stopwatch icon next to evolution and it'll open up an expression editor. Now in here we'll just type in time times 150. I'm not going to explain what this expression does, I have in previous videos. If you're interested in learning more about expressions, drop your email on our website and I'll send out a free After Effects expressions cheat sheet and a few other goodies. Okay, let's create another solid using the shortcut we learned earlier, Control or Command Y, and we'll name it Gradient. Head over to the Effects and Presets panel and search for Gradient Ramp and drag it onto our solid. In the effect controls, hit Swap Colors so our gradient flips, and then change the blend mode from normal to linear burn. If you don't see this mode drop down, press the button down here to swap from switches to modes. Select our two solids, right click and pre-comp and call it Fractals. Now let's add an adjustment layer by right clicking, going to New and then Adjustment Layer, or by using the shortcut Control Alt Y or Command Option Y, and we'll name it Warp. Then search for polar coordinates in the Effects and Presets panel and drag and drop it onto our adjustment layer. Let's search for radial fast blur as well and drag and drop it onto our layer 2. The easiest way to explain polar coordinates is that it can either take a linear shape and round it out, or it can take a radial shape and flatten it out. It's actually quite simple, but a super powerful tool. So in the Effect Controls panel, change the polar coordinates interpolation to 100%, this is the strength of the effect, and switch the conversion type to rect to polar. Change the radial fast blur zoom property to brightest so our blur only affects the bright spots, and let's press play and see what this looks like. Cool, we have this kind of ethereal smoke emitter now. Let's pre-comp our layers and call it smoke, and we'll duplicate it using the shortcut Control or Command D. In the Effects and Presets panel, search for Transform and drag and drop the effect onto one of our smoke layers. We'll set the scale to 200 and then we'll copy and paste the effect onto the other smoke layer. While we're at it, we'll rotate one of these smoke layers by 180 degrees. Head back to the Effects and Presets panel and search for CC Toner, and we'll drag this onto both of our layers and change one of the midtones to a darkish red and the other to a dull blue. Finally, let's change the blend mode for both smoke layers to screen. Okay, time to make this into a swirl. Let's make 3 adjustment layers with the shortcut we learned earlier, and we'll start by renaming the first one to Darken. Search for CC Radial Fast Blur in the Effects and Presets panel and drag and drop it onto our Darken layer. Let's search for Curves as well, and we'll drag and drop it onto our layer 2. We'll change the blur amount to 80, and we want this fast blur to affect the darkest areas instead. Now with the curves, we're just going to click and drag this line so it has a little bit of a curve to it. Onto the next adjustment layer, let's start by renaming it Distortion. We're going to drag 3 effects onto this adjustment layer, so let's head over to the Effects and Presets panel. First effect is going to be Transform, drag and drop this onto our layer. The next one is Optics Compensation, drag and drop that too, and now finally Twirl. In the Transform controls, we're only going to change the scale down to 50. In Optics Compensation, we'll change the field of view to 100 and reverse lens distortion. Then we'll change the twirl angle to 210 degrees and twirl radius to 24. It's not exactly like the portal in the original, but I'm kind of vibing with the ethereal smoke coming off the ends of the portal. Finally, with our last adjustment layer, let's call it Glow, and we'll drag and drop the glow effect from the effects panel. We'll change the threshold to 50 and the radius to 250. And that's it for our background. Let's select our layers and pre-comp them, calling it background, and let's move on to creating our text. We're using 3 fonts for this project. The closest I can find for the Doctor Strange text is a font called Imperator, and we're using the bold variation of that font. For Multiverse of Madness, I used a font called The Soul of Vodka. And for words like in, the, and of, I'm using plain old Times New Roman. You can find those first 2 fonts on any of those free websites, but I'll leave a link in the description down below. Let's create our first text layer. Control or Command T to select the type tool and click on the viewport to create a new text layer. Let's just type out Doctor first and select it using Control or Command A and change the font to Imperator Bold. Control or Command Enter to exit text edit mode and press V to switch to the selection tool and select our text. Head over to the Align panel and align our text layer horizontally and vertically, and then we'll move it slightly upwards by clicking and dragging while holding Shift to keep it aligned. With our text layer selected, Control or Command D to duplicate it, and then hold Shift and drag it to move the copy back down. Double click the duplicate layer to edit the text, and we'll change this to Strange, and change the font size to around 192, 200, whatever floats your boat. In the original title sequence, the R and the A are touching, so let's select our R, and in the character panel, we'll decrease the tracking until it looks just right. We'll select both our layers and reposition this so we've got some more room to fit the rest of the text, and we'll pre-comp our text layers calling it top text. Inside our top text pre-comp, we'll create another text layer and we'll change it to in the. Change the font to Times New Roman bold, make it smaller, and fix up the tracking. Center it to our composition and place it just below the main text. Now we need to create these little accents here, so we'll select the shape tool and select polygon and just draw a small polygon. Expand the shape properties and under contents, polystar 1 and polystar path 1, we'll see that there's a points property. Change this to 3 so we get a triangle. Press Y to select the anchor point tool and we'll grab the anchor point and place it roughly in the middle of our shape. With our shape layer selected, press R to pull up the rotation property and rotate it -90 degrees, and then press S to pull up the scale property, uncheck constrain proportions, and then play around with the scale until it looks just right. Once we're happy with the look of it, duplicate the shape layer and change the rotation to 90 degrees, and then place each of the accents on either side of our text. Select everything and pre-comp it, calling it Top Text Master. Now let's give this text that reflective chrome look that we see in the trailer. Create a new solid and rename it to Reflection and place it underneath our top text master layer. We'll pre-comp this solid and name it Reflection Map and double click it to change its contents. We'll drag and drop the fractal noise effect onto our layer, and in the effect controls, change fractal noise to turbulent smooth and noise type to soft linear. We'll also change the contrast to 120 and the brightness to 6. In the transform properties, uncheck uniform scaling so we can edit the width and height independently and change the height to something ridiculous like 10,000. Now right below that, let's create a new keyframe for offset turbulence at the start of our timeline, and then hit end to move the playhead to the end of the timeline and change the offset to 1500, and it should automatically create a new keyframe. Finally, the last thing we'll do here is lower the complexity to 2 and then head back to our top text pre-comp. Before we add any more effects to this layer, switch the track matte to Alpha Matte Top Text Master. Head over to the Effects and Presets panel and search for CC Glass and drag and drop it onto our layer. While we're here, we'll search for CC Blobalize and drag and drop it onto our layer as well. Under the CC Glass controls, we'll change our bump map to Top Text Master, and we'll change the softness to 50 and height to 100. Expand the light settings and change it to AE Lights. Now under the CC Blobalize controls, we'll change the blob layer to Top Text Master, and we'll change the softness to 20. Press play, and now we should have a reflective chrome look, but it's still pretty dark, so let's try adding some lighting. Right click, select new, and then light, and some light properties should show up. We'll change the light type to point, we'll change the color to white, and bump that bad boy up to 400%, and press OK. Let's animate the lighting a little to make it look a little bit more cinematic. Press P to access the position properties, and set the last position value to -105, and create a keyframe. Move forward on the timeline to around 2 seconds, and change it to -500. The final touch is to import a Marvel Studios logo and place it on top. And that's it for this text composition. We're basically going to do the same thing with the next bit with one minor change. So let's head back to our Doctor Strange intro composition and let's quickly create our text layers. Control or Command T to create new text and write out Multiverse first and change the font to Soul of Vodka. Duplicate this text layer using Ctrl or Command D and drag it across and change the text to Madness. We have a small spot here in the middle to fit in of, so create a new text layer, type in of, and change the font to Times New Roman and scale it down a bit. After we've aligned everything, select our text layers and pre-comp it, calling it bottom text. Now let's do exactly what we did with our top text. Create another pre-comp called bottom text master, create a new solid and call it reflection, pre-comp and call it reflection map 2, and to save some time, let's just copy and paste the effects directly from the other layers. Just remember that you need to switch bump map and blob layer to bottom text master or it won't work. Let's copy and paste the light as well, and we'll just adjust the position so it's aligned with the text, and just make sure that this change is constant in both keyframes. The lighting in this is going to be a little bit different because we actually need it to go in reverse. So to do that, right click on our light layer, go to time and select time reverse layer. Let's pre-comp this into a new composition called Multiverse text. So the final little bit for the text animation is to make it look like it's being reconstructed. Head over to the effects and presets panel and search for shatter and drag and drop it onto our layer. We're going to be changing a lot of these settings, so I'll just list them off. I love to explain what each does, but this video is already getting quite chunky. So let's change our view mode to rendered and we'll make sure to render all. Under the shape properties, change the pattern to glass, the repetition to 150 and the extrusion depth to 0.05. Under force 1, we'll change the radius to 0.95 and the strength to 3.5. Under physics, we'll change the rotation speed to 1, randomness to 0.5, the mass variance to 60%, and gravity to 0. Finally, let's create a keyframe for radius at the start of the timeline, move ahead to around 5 seconds and change the radius to 0. Grab the first keyframe and move it to the end of the timeline because we want the shadow effect reversed. Let's right click on our layer, go to time and select time reverse layer. Let's head back to our Doctor Strange comp and add in a few final touches. We'll select all our comps and pre-comp again and call it Doctor Strange master. The first thing we're going to do is add in some movement, so with our Doctor Strange intro comp selected, press R to pull up the rotation properties and change this to -15 and create a keyframe. Now press S to pull up the scale properties and change this to 370% and create a keyframe as well. Now press U to show all the properties with keyframes and we'll move to around 3.5 seconds and change the rotation back to 0, move ahead just slightly and change the scale back to 100. Select all our keyframes and press F9 to ease. And then let's head over to the effects and presets panel and search for light rays and drag and drop it onto our layer. In the effect controls, press the target icon on the center property and click smack bang in the middle of our portal. Drop the warp softness to 0 and bump up the intensity to 1200 and create a keyframe. Move forward to 2.5 seconds and turn the intensity down to 100. The final touch we'll add is a little bit of camera shake as we're zooming out. Search for slider in the effects and presets panel and drag it onto our layer. Duplicate the effects, so we have 2 of these, and rename one amount and the other intensity. Now with our layer selected, press P to bring up the position properties, and we're going to add an expression by Alt or Option clicking on the stopwatch icon. Type in wiggle, and then inside the bracket, take the pick whip and link it to our intensity control. We'll type a comma between these 2 brackets, and then pick whip again to the amount control. So basically, we're just using this wiggle expression and having the 2 parameters here controlled by the sliders we created. Press home to send the playhead to the beginning of the timeline and change the amount value to 5 and the intensity value to 20 and create keyframes for both. Move forward to around 5 seconds and set both values to 0. And we're finished. Let's see what we've got. If you made it this far, congrats. I know this was a bit of a longer one, so I appreciate you sticking around. We've actually got a bunch of content coming out in the next couple of months, and I've got a couple of announcements that I'll probably speak about in the next video. But with that being said, that's the end of this one, friends. You know what to do to support the channel. As always, stay creative and go for broke.